I'm so thrilled to help moderate this panel, and I wanted to begin by asking about the methodology that you used to write the book.
The methodology?
Yeah.
Well, as you all know, I'm a theatre director, and I'm not really an author, but I have authored this book. So the methodology I used, first of all, I wanted to write the book because I thought it was important to put on record some kind of idea about the life and times of Alkazi, the kind of work that he did. And I was very interested in finding out about the way he thought, how he moved from one topic to the next, how he sort of intensified his work as he moved along, and how he moved from theatre to the visual arts, which we haven't had time to do a reading of any of the chapters to do with the visual arts. So the methodology really was that first I kind of structured a timeline. I did a lot of projects before I wrote the book. I did an exhibition. Nisar, my husband, and myself did an exhibition, a very large exhibition on Alkazi, on his theatre work. This was in 2016. This was followed by us discovering that Alkazi had been a painter. I only heard about the fact that my father was a painter in earlier days. But then Nisar and I came upon this trunk in an old CD trunk at our farm. We found this trunk and it was full of 100 drawings of Alkazi. Alkazi had made a series of drawings while he was at RADA. So we did an exhibition on all these drawings, which Ranjit Hoskote curated in 2018. So that was another opportunity I got to work alongside Ranjit and then do a whole lot of research. And then I did a third project, which was collecting material towards a book called Ebrahim Alkazi Directing Art, which was on the work Alkazi did at the Art Heritage Gallery. So these three projects, which ran across several years, helped me to gather material because I had to collect my material, I had to create a timeline. And once I got all my material together, the one thing that I did not have during those projects was that I hadn't really looked into all the personal letters. So I went to the letters, and first of all, I have to tell you, there was something like 2,000 letters. There are 2,000 letters written from my father to my mother, from my father to Uma Anand, from my father to us, to my brother and myself, Faisal and myself. And so all these letters, and to his brothers and sisters, and to artists, etc. So those letters written to my mother, of course, I found amongst my mother's things, etc. Now, those gave me a total, it is not just about what's happening to my father, not just the timeline, he did this, he did this, he did this play, he did this exhibition, but now the letters provided me with the emotional story. Because in a letter, you just don't write about what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. All these things come about in letters. And I'm really sad that we don't write enough letters nowadays. We just, go to the computer and send messages. So, but these letters have been so useful in constructing a tale like this, which has an emotional content to it. It is not just a sort of a recitation of what Alkazi did. So I'm putting that all together, and then I think what you're really interested perhaps in knowing about is how did I find words for them?
Yes. I want to ask that because it's a very powerful book, and I have some theatrical questions, but I want to start with this personal one. So you have Alkazi speaking, but these could not be his words, or are they his words? If they are, how did you get those words? I mean, what he said to the actors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you are, in a certain sense, representing your father, but you're also recreating him.
That is true.
So please tell us about that, how you did that, how you got his voice, not right, and also that of Roshan as well. I mean, that was an extraordinarily powerful set of readings when we got the middle part. And then I have a follow-up question to that. But how did you get their voices?
Well, actually, I got their voices, like two of the sequences which you just saw. One is when he's talking to the actor in Murder in the Cathedral. That actually, my father used to do post-mortems. And he used to write, and he used to publish these post-mortems in his bulletin. So what he thought of the performance, he then reproduced in his bulletin. So I had such valuable material in these thin little bulletins where my father is talking, because he wanted to train the audience to try and understand what it meant to do these kind of roles. So that entire thing, practically, except for a few things like halt and he coming in and describing the scene, etc., that's all me, because I dreamt that up, because I'm a theater director. And I created a scenario for that to happen. For example, this entire sequence where he tells a theater group that I'm walking out and it's going to be the theater unit and I'm leaving, that entire thing, again, is an article in the theater unit bulletin where he calls it Why We Have Resigned. So after he resigned, he wrote this entire thing out and thought that the public should know why he had resigned. And so this entire thing, again, is from there. So it is quite authentic, these bits. And I made it a point that these important things, like he gave a talk, for example, in 1956, when first time he stepped onto the national stage. That, again, I have reproduced as one of the chapters. So that, together with my father's voice ringing in my ears, as I have heard for so many years, we put that all together. And my mother, as you're asking about my mother, I interviewed her because I had planned to write this book or something on my father many, many, many years ago, now maybe over 25 years ago. And so while my parents were still alive, I actually interviewed them. So I have major interviews with my father, which Nisar and I got him to sit down in New York.
Right.
And that's the place he had a little time. And we interviewed him on his entire life. And so I have used parts of that as well.
I would like to ask a question, not directly about the book, but about your father's legacy, the Indian theater during his later years and after he passed, and now the state of the National School of Drama, the state of the theater. What is his current presence in the theater? Then I think we should turn to the arts, the visual art. But what is Ebrahim Alkazi's legacy, in your view?
Well, Ebrahim Alkazi's legacy is, of course, all the stuff he did during his lifetime, but his legacy is also, he put it himself in place. He put his legacy in place in the sense that he's an institution builder. He built 7 institutions during his lifetime, starting with the theater group, the theater unit, etc., right up to 2 institutions which he started in New York. One of which was called SICA, the Center for International Contemporary Art, and the other one was SIPIA International, which was for photography. So he was an institution builder, and what he has left today, which still carries on, are 3 institutions, which we manage. We, meaning my family and I, we manage. So we have the Art Heritage Gallery, which is going to be 50 years old, which he started in 1977 with my mother. That continues its work of supporting younger and emerging artists. Then we have the Alkazi collection of photography, and we have the Alkazi collection of art. So the Alkazi collection of photography especially, is an entire institution and an archive which has collected material on photography from 1857 onwards and is available for scholars and students to visit. So this legacy carries on, and myself, my husband, my brother, and our children, all our children are very much involved in this entire endeavor to take this forward and to bring a new perspective to things, not just to carry on, but to bring a new perspective. And as far as theater is concerned, I think he has trained over 500-600 students, and they all carry on their theater work. Of course, many of them have been older, they have passed away, but you yourself have worked with the students, so you know the caliber.
Yes, I worked with Manohar Singh and Sureka Sikri, and when I did Cherry Bagicha, Cherry Orchard in Delhi. So those were among the finest actors I ever worked with, for sure.
Yes. So they had an opportunity. Actors had an opportunity under Alkazi. He built such a tight syllabus for them, intense syllabus for them, where through the 3 years that they were students and another 2 or 3 years when they were members of the repertory company, they played a range of roles, which would go from the Greeks to the present day, of from Western literature, but also all the major classical works from India. So they became students who had this vast range behind them. And so he was preparing them. His training was to prepare actors to take on whatever came their way,
right.
A modern actor. He was not training an Indian actor. He was always training a modern actor because he knew the actor had to participate and go ahead and act in movies, go ahead and act with other people. So they had to have an all-round kind of a training. Yeah.
I think most in the room know that Mr. Alkazi was a polymath, but even within the field of visual art, he also was a polymath. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about his multiple roles within the visual arts, as collector, as a proto-curator, organizing, bringing reproductions of modern Western art, which we saw in your short film, and his relationships with artists, all in a very fledgling moment that you recreated so beautifully in the book as well.
Yes. Well, I think for the visual arts, he took forward his ideas. You see, once he had reached a sort of a pinnacle of what he wanted to do in the theater, he left the theater. And we had come to a position here in the reading today where he was very upset about, and we haven't gone into it in detail in the reading. But when he got into the visual arts, Alkazi thought to himself, at least I believe Alkazi thought to himself, that not enough is being done by the government in terms of arts education through the museums, etc., at their disposal, that they were not building enough material on contemporary Indian art. His whole idea was that modernity has to be talked about, Indian modernity has to be talked about and understood, and it was just not a replication of Western art in some diluted form. So Alkazi positioned himself and built an institution called Art Heritage, which was an institution which was going to be an art gallery on the one side, but on the other side, he was going to do archival research on the modern movement. And so the kind of exhibitions that he mounted were either of very new emerging artists, like most of the artists from the Baroda school or whatever, had their first shows with Alkazi. Alkazi already recognized their talent when they were very, very young. People like Arpita, people like Ghulam Sheikh. These people got their, Sudhir Patwardhan, etc., they all got their first shows with Art Heritage when they were in their 20s. Supporting young people was his main idea. The second part of his idea was to create a canon. He felt that there was no canon in modern art. And so he selected to do retrospectives of all the artists who had already proved themselves. So Hussain had a retrospective, Akbar Padamsee had a retrospective, Somnath Haur had a retrospective. He did 23 retrospectives. And to do a retrospective means you're gathering material on the artist's whole life. And you're putting it up there in a series of about 80 works, 80, 90 works. And you're saying, this is the contribution of X, Y, and Z. So he was building a history. He was making a history. He was very conscious that art history was the next thing to be done, the next thing to be promoted, because we had no art history. There was no knowledge of art history. And so he got very, very young students like Rubina Karode, who is now the director of the KNMA. She was writing for Alkazi as a student, you know, all very, very young people. He had a talent for selecting people. He knew what they were going to be about 10 years from then. So, you know, he built the art movement in that way.
It's also incredible how early on, when he was friends with the artists, the progressive Sousa and all, he was able to be very intimate, but also keep a distance. And that comes across very strongly in the book.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
yes.
what comes across equally strongly for me is your presence in the book, maybe to some degree indirectly. In other words, when you speak of biographies, usually biographies are written by a scholar who is not directly involved. Then you speak of memoirs, which is deeply personal. But your book is a true biography with that kind of detailed research and archival research, and yet it has, as we could see in the readings, the feeling of a memoir. So I'm going to ask you a personal question. You perhaps don't want to address it, but I hope you do. The dialogue between Amal, the author, and Amal, the daughter. How do you speak to each other, and what do you say to each other?
Amal, the daughter?
To Amal, the author. In other words,
Amal, the author. Yes,
you're working in a biography, but you're talking about your father, your mother, Uma, people you are intimately with.
Well, you know, I did not have any preconceived idea of what I was going to do. But I thought that once I settled down to writing, and now I'm going to write, I first thought I would write just on my father's work. I had no intention of bringing my personal self or my family in the manner I have. But as it went along, it appeared to me that people should know how artists live. People should know how we work in the theatre. People should know that it's all done on a shoestring budget. People should know that it's all a very homegrown, and the theatre in India and the movement of art in India, it all happened in our homes. So I'm sorry. So I thought this must come through, and the aliveness must come through of the lives of these people, and therefore I tried to include as many people as I remembered, and I tried to bring those people in whom I knew well. I knew Sousa, I knew Nissim, all these people who become rather major in the book. I knew them because I thought, I'm not going to report on people I don't know. Hussain, we knew very well. Akbar Padamsee, we knew very well, etc. Sorry, we're overrunning time, is it?
Should we have one more question? Actually, Richard, can I ask you a question? Because you knew Mr. Alkazi as well.
Yes,
and I wonder if you could reflect on your impression of Mr. Alkazi and the book and the totality of this experience.
Well, first of all, I learned more about Ebrahim Alkazi through your book than through my knowing of him. By the time I met him, which was in the 1970s, he had more or less left the theater by then. And I was there working with with you and with Nisar and with the people at the NSD rep. But I wasn't, what struck me about Alkazi personally, he was to me an imperial figure. I can only say that. He was I'm not a shy guy. And I was, if not in awe of him, I knew to treat him with deference and respect. That's the kind of authority he had. But I never experienced his theater work directly. I do know that, the kind of work I was doing and that I did in India with you was not the style of theater that he had done. I have no idea what he thought of that work. But he made possible through his students, through you, through Nisar, through the family, through the move of a Bombay culture to Delhi to some degree. It was the theater, the kind of theater he did entered into from, it's now Mumbai, but into what was Bombay, and then it moved to Delhi, and Delhi was much more conservative in a certain way than Bombay. And his influence was all around through the people he worked with and taught. But in reading your book, I learned so much that I didn't know. And then now hearing your book, I think it should be a total audio book. It's a fabulous performance. I mean, I'm just riveted by the reading. So I really want to thank you and the performers who did such a splendid job. And I assume you selected what sections to read. So this was itself a magnificent performance, and I thank you for it.
Thank you so much, Amal, for this magnificent book and for bringing us together. And it's an honor to be part of your story in the tiniest of ways.
Thank you so much.
And Richard for being here.
Asia Society for having us. And we are so excited to be here and to share this. We've already done this so-called performance and launch in a couple of cities in India. And people have been very enthusiastic. And yes, I agree with Richard. We should put this down because this is, ready to be an audio book of some kind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.